Now, for more on NAFTA, I'm joined by Doreen Edelman. She's from the law firm Baker Donelson and is a co-leader of its global business team. Welcome, Doreen.
Thank you.
So let's start by looking at where negotiations stand right now.
Well, under the Trade Promotion Authority, which Congress has given to the president to negotiate trade agreements, the president has a process where he can do the negotiations, but then when it goes back to Congress, Congress has to say yes or no. No amendments, no debates. So there's a process. In the process so far, the president has notified Congress of its intent to go ahead and negotiate, or in this case, renegotiate the trade agreement. Then, step two, the president had to provide Congress with the objectives of what the renegotiation will look like. And as you know, the president did this through his U.S. trade representative last week. He presented a some would say detailed, some would say vague, outline of what the objectives should be. The next step will be that the negotiations can begin in the middle of August, August 16th, but meanwhile, you have Congress and the committees with subject matter jurisdiction that need to be able to communicate to the administration what they would like and what they would like to see in the agreement.
So the U.S. has laid out, released its goals for the renegotiation. Now, what about Mexico and Canada's officials? What have they laid out so far?
Well, they're participating. They have reviewed the objective, and both parties have been pretty neutral and balanced in their response so far. And all three countries can improve upon the agreement. Everybody recognizes that. The agreement came into effect in 1994. Changes do need to be made. As Secretary Ross said earlier, e-commerce needs to be changed, updated. We didn't have cloud computing. We didn't have data storage issues. Rules of origin, NAFTA content needs to be evaluated. And notice that the administration did not say U.S. content. They said North American content. So we need to take a look at that. Labor and environment. These issues were not in NAFTA. They were in a side agreement, and there was no enforcement mechanism. So everyone, or all three countries, and the consumers and businesses can benefit from adding those topics as well. Right. And then professional services, financial services, which the U.S. cares about, needs to be added in. And Mexico and Canada want some of these things, and to different degrees.
Now, let's look at enforcement. We know that the White House has indicated that it may want to eliminate to the Chapter 19 dispute resolution mechanism, basically something that would affect how they deal with anti-dumping and countervailing duties. How large of a sticking point do you think that's going to be?
I can't tell you that. We have to see with the negotiations. There is a good negotiating team. The Assistant USTR, John Melley, who was appointed, started with USTR in 1988. So he has almost 30 years of negotiating experience. From my experience involved in the U.S.-Oman Free Trade Agreement, I know the process, and I know that it's not him negotiating alone. He will have subject matter experts for every single chapter of the free trade agreement. So you are going to have 20, 30 people on each side working on these negotiations. And you're going to have outside issues. Like for Mexico, border security, immigration, homeland security, all these issues could also play a role. With Canada, as you already mentioned, dumping cases, lumber, dairy, poultry, all these different issues could factor in whether or not they're in NAFTA.
And Doreen, speaking of the industries, which are the ones that you think will be most impacted by the negotiations?
Depends on what they do with rule of origin, because auto parts and automotives are key to the whole North American platform. The U.S. wants to see the border with Canada opened up for dairy and eggs and poultry. The meat industry, Mexico is their third largest customer, next to two Asian countries, so it could be a variety.
Now, in terms of how other trade partners that do business with these three countries are viewing what's happening, is this perhaps an opportunity for them to step in somewhere?
That's a consideration. NAFTA positions the United States together as a unit, and if we break that up or split that in any way, it does allow for other regional trade agreements to benefit. If, in the reverse, to answer your question, if the rules of origin stay where they are now with auto parts, 62.5%, status quo is the same. If you're going to increase that to 70%, 72%, that will have an effect on how many Chinese parts can come into Mexico, go into components, and come back into the U.S. So everyone's watching, as you know. And
certainly no one more than workers. And we know that actually a lot of workers' rights groups in the U.S. have expressed some problems with the U.S.'s objectives. I mean, for all three countries, you have Canada's elections coming up in 2 years, Mexico's next year. Right. How much of the political pressure is going to weigh on the outcome here?
Political pressure is going to be there. But I will say, you look at any of the negotiations for any of the free trade agreements, labor issues, environmental issues, you're always going to have those that think the agreement hasn't gone far enough. But on the other hand, at least getting the labor and environmental provisions in the agreement is a step in the right direction. So small steps.
Small steps indeed. Thank you so much, Doreen Edelman, co-leader of law firm Baker Donelson's Global Business Team.